Thompson family had always dreamed of a fresh start. After years of saving, they finally moved into their dream home, a sprawling, century-old house on the outskirts of Cedar Hollow, a quiet town in the heart of Tornado Alley. The house was massive, with creaky wooden floors, tall windows, and a basement that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth. They hadn't had time to explore the basement properly since moving in, but with its heavy iron door and sturdy walls, it seemed like the perfect shelter when the tornado warnings came. The warnings were sudden and urgent. A series of powerful tornadoes were barreling towards Cedar Hollow, and the Thompsons had mere minutes to prepare. Mark, the father, grabbed flashlights, blankets, and their emergency radio. Sarah, the mother, packed food and water. Their two children, Emily, 12, and Jake, 8, clutched their favorite toys, their faces pale with fear. The family hurried down the narrow staircase into the basement, the iron door slamming shut behind them with a deafening clang. The basement was cold and damp, but it felt safe. The walls were thick, and the generator hummed reassuringly in the corner. They huddled together, watching the news on a small TV as the first tornado hit. The sound was monstrous, a deafening roar that shook the house to its core. The lights flickered, and the TV screen went black. The generator kicked in, and they sat in silence, listening to the destruction above. Hours turned into days. Tornado after tornado ravaged the town. The Thompsons could hear the wind howling like a vengeful spirit, debris crashing against the house. The basement door held firm, but the air grew heavier, colder. By the third day, the tornadoes had passed, but the Thompsons' ordeal was far from over. When the winds finally died down, Mark tried to open the basement door. It wouldn't budge. He pushed with all his strength, but it was as if something massive was blocking it from the other side. Sarah joined him, but the door remained sealed. They tried not to panic. Surely help would come soon. They had food, water, and the generator. They could wait. But as the hours turned into days, no one came. The TV and phones were dead. Only the emergency radio worked, crackling with static and occasional updates about the devastation. Cedar Hollow had been hit hard. Rescue teams were overwhelmed. The Thompsons were on their own. It started with small things. Emily swore she saw shadows moving in the corners of the basement. Jake heard whispers when no one was speaking. The temperature dropped suddenly, their breath visible in the air. The generator, which had been running smoothly, began to sputter. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. One night, as the family slept, Sarah woke to the sound of footsteps. She grabbed Mark's arm, her heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right beside her. She screamed, waking everyone. The basement was empty, but the feeling of being watched lingered. On the fifth day, the food and water were nearly gone. The generator was failing, and the air was thick with despair. That's when the spirit appeared. It materialized in the corner of the basement, a figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing faintly. The family froze, too terrified to move. The spirit spoke, its voice echoing in their minds. "You are trapped here, as I was trapped long ago," it said. "This basement was my prison, and now it is yours." Mark demanded answers. The spirit revealed its story. Decades ago, the house had belonged to a wealthy family. The father, driven mad by jealousy and greed, had locked his wife and children in the basement, leaving them to die. The spirit was the wife, bound to the basement by her rage and sorrow. She had cursed the house, ensuring that anyone who sought shelter here would share her fate. The spirit offered them a way out, but the condition was horrifying. "One of you must stay," it said. "One must take my place or you will all perish." The Thompsons recoiled in horror. How could they choose? Mark and Sarah argued, each willing to sacrifice themselves, but neither could bear the thought of leaving their children. Emily and Jake clung to their parents, crying. As the days passed, the basement grew darker, colder. The spirit's presence became oppressive, its whispers constant. The generator died, plunging them into darkness. The air grew thin, and the walls seemed to close in. On the seventh day, they could wait no longer. Mark made a decision. He would stay. He kissed Sarah and the children goodbye, his heart breaking as he told them to leave when the door opened. The spirit appeared, its eyes gleaming with satisfaction. But as Mark stepped forward, Jake suddenly broke free from Sarah's grasp. "No!" he shouted. "I'll stay! I don't want you to die, Dad!" Before anyone could stop him, Jake ran toward the spirit. The basement door creaked open, and a blinding light filled the room. Sarah and Emily screamed, reaching for Jake, but he was gone. The spirit vanished, and the door swung wide. The Thompsons stumbled out of the basement, gasping for fresh air. The house was in ruins, the town unrecognizable. Rescue teams found them hours later, dazed and traumatized. They told no one about what had happened in the basement, but Jake was gone. His body was never found. The Thompsons moved away, unable to bear the memories. Yet sometimes, in the dead of night, Sarah would hear Jake's voice, whispering from the shadows, and Mark would dream of the basement, its iron door waiting, always waiting. The Thompsons tried to move on. They settled in a small town hundreds of miles away, but the weight of Jake's disappearance haunted them. Sarah would wake up screaming, convinced she heard Jake calling for her. Mark became withdrawn, his guilt eating him alive. Emily, now a teenager, carried the trauma silently, her once bright eyes dull with pain. Years passed, but the memories of the basement never faded. One night, Sarah had a vivid dream. She saw Jake, older now, standing in the basement. He looked at her with pleading eyes and said, "Mom, you have to come back. It's not over." Sarah woke up in a cold sweat. She told Mark about the dream, and to her surprise, he admitted he'd been having similar dreams. Emily, too, confessed that she'd been hearing Jake's voice in her sleep. The family knew they couldn't ignore it any longer. They had to go back. The drive to Cedar Hollow was tense. The town had been rebuilt, but the scars of the tornadoes were still visible. Their old house stood at the edge of town, its windows boarded up, the yard overgrown with weeds. The basement door, still heavy and rusted, seemed to beckon them. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder. The house was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. They descended into the basement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the faint sound of whispers filled the air. The spirit appeared again, its form more solid than before. "You've come back," it said, its voice a mix of malice and triumph. "But you are too late. The boy is mine." Sarah screamed, "Give him back! He's just a child!" The spirit's eyes glowed brighter. "A life for a life, that was the deal. But you broke it. You left, and now the balance must be restored." Mark stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Take me instead. Let Jake go." The spirit laughed, a sound that echoed through the basement. "It's not that simple. The boy's soul is bound to this place. To free him, you must break the curse." The spirit revealed the full story. The man who had locked her in the basement had been a powerful occultist. He had performed a ritual to bind her soul to the house, ensuring she could never leave. The only way to break the curse was to find the hidden relic he had used, a silver locket buried somewhere in the basement. The Thompsons searched frantically, their flashlights darting across the walls and floor. The whispers grew louder, the air colder. Emily suddenly stopped, her flashlight catching something glinting in the corner. She knelt down and dug through the dirt, her hands trembling. There it was, the locket, tarnished but intact. The spirit's form flickered, its voice urgent. "Destroy it, break the locket, and the curse will be broken." Mark grabbed a hammer from the toolbox and brought it down on the locket. The sound was deafening, a sharp crack that echoed through the basement. The spirit let out a wail, its form dissolving into smoke. The air grew warmer, the whispers fading into silence. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a faint light appeared in the corner of the basement. Jake stepped out of the shadows, his face pale but alive. The family rushed to him, tears streaming down their faces. But something was wrong. Jake didn't smile. He didn't speak. His eyes were empty, his movements stiff. Sarah hugged him, but his body felt cold, lifeless. "Jake," she whispered, pulling back to look at him. His lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't his smile. It was the spirit's. "You broke the curse," it said through Jake's mouth. "But you forgot one thing. A soul cannot return to a body that has been claimed. The boy is gone. I am all that remains." The Thompsons screamed as Jake's body collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The spirit's laughter echoed through the basement, fading into silence. As they stood there, shattered and broken, Emily noticed something on the floor. It was the locket, still intact. The hammer had only scratched its surface. The spirit had lied. The curse was never broken. The basement door slammed shut behind them, the iron lock clicking into place. The whispers returned, louder this time. The Thompsons realized the truth too late. The basement wasn't just a prison for the spirit. It was a trap for anyone who entered. And now, they were its new prisoners. The spirit's voice echoed one last time. "Welcome home." The Thompsons were trapped. The basement door was sealed shut, and no amount of force could open it. The air grew colder, the whispers louder. The spirit's presence was everywhere, its malice seeping into their minds. Mark tried to stay strong for his family, but even he could feel the weight of despair pressing down on him. Days turned into weeks, though time lost all meaning in the darkness. The food and water ran out, and the family grew weaker. Emily began to hear Jake's voice again, calling to her from the shadows. She would wake up screaming, convinced he was still alive, still trapped somewhere in the basement. One night, as the family huddled together for warmth, Emily noticed something strange. The floor beneath them felt uneven, as if there was something hidden beneath the dirt. She began to dig, her fingers scraping against the cold earth. Mark and Sarah joined her, their desperation driving them forward. After hours of digging, they uncovered a hidden trapdoor. It was old and rusted, but it opened with a creak. Below it was a narrow staircase leading even deeper into the earth. The family hesitated, but they had no choice. They had to find a way out. The staircase led to a small circular chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. In the center of the room was an altar, and on it lay the silver locket they had tried to destroy. But this time, it was different. The locket was open, revealing a small, blackened photograph of the spirit, the woman who had been trapped here so long ago. As they approached the altar, the spirit's voice filled the chamber. "You cannot escape," it said. "This is my domain, and you are my prisoners. But if you wish to leave, you must make a choice." The spirit explained that the curse could only be broken by a willing sacrifice. One of them had to take the locket and bind themselves to the basement, just as the spirit had done. The others would be free to leave, but the one who stayed would be trapped forever. Mark and Sarah argued, each willing to sacrifice themselves. Emily, however, remained silent. She stared at the locket, her mind racing. She had always felt guilty for not being able to save Jake. Now, she saw a chance to make things right. Before anyone could stop her, Emily grabbed the locket and clasped it around her neck. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the spirit's voice echoed one last time. "The curse is broken. You are free." Mark and Sarah woke up in the basement, the trapdoor closed and the dirt floor undisturbed. The locket was gone, and so was Emily. They called out for her, but there was no response. The basement door creaked open, and they stumbled out into the sunlight, dazed and confused. The house was silent, the town eerily quiet. They searched for Emily, but she was nowhere to be found. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of her. Mark and Sarah began to doubt if she had ever existed, if any of it had been real. One night, As they sat in their new home, the phone rang. It was Emily's voice on the other end, faint and distant. "Mom, Dad, I'm still here. I'm in the basement. Please come back." Mark and Sarah rushed back to the house, their hearts pounding. They descended into the basement, but it was empty. The trapdoor was gone, the floor solid and unbroken. They called out for Emily, but there was no response. As they turned to leave, they noticed something on the floor. It was the locket, lying in the dirt. The photograph inside was no longer blackened. It was a picture of Emily, her eyes filled with fear. Mark and Sarah realized the horrifying truth. The curse had never been broken. The spirit had tricked them, using Emily as its new vessel. The locket was a trap, binding her soul to the basement just as the spirit had been bound. They tried to destroy the locket, but it was indestructible. The whispers returned, louder than ever, and the air grew colder. They knew they had to leave, but as they reached the basement door, it slammed shut behind them. The spirit's voice echoed through the darkness, filled with triumph. "Welcome home.